Before 7 years of marriage, we couldn't have a child. Then my husband had twins with my own brother. I quietly signed the divorce papers. When he went home, his father turned pale and whispered, "Wait, she didn't tell you." The room fell silent before anyone dared to breathe. My husband's confident smile cracked for the first time as his eyes searched my face for an answer I refused to give. I simply slid the signed papers across the polished oak table. The scratching sound of the pen had already said everything I needed to say. 7 years. 7 years of fertility appointments, painful injections, whispered prayers, and nights spent comforting the man I believed was grieving beside me. I had blamed my own body every single day. I carried guilt that wasn't mine while he held my hand and promised we'd survive it together. Outside the lawyer's office, rain tapped softly against the windows. Inside, the truth sat heavier than stone. My brother couldn't even look at me. My husband avoided my eyes. Only his father seemed to understand that the divorce wasn't the real disaster. The real disaster was the secret I had chosen not to reveal. Yet, my name is Elena, and until that afternoon, I believed loyalty could survive almost anything. I had built my entire life around the people I loved, convinced that sacrifice was simply another word for commitment. I met my husband, Daniel, when we were both struggling to establish our careers. We had very little money, but we had endless plans. We celebrated every small victory together, shared impossible dreams over cheap dinners, and promised that one day we'd fill our home with children. My older brother, Adrian, was the person I trusted most before I ever met Daniel. He had always been protective, confident, and charming enough to make everyone laugh. I never imagined the two men I loved most could become the reason my world collapsed. When pregnancy never came, I carried the burden without complaint. Every failed treatment felt like another apology I owed my husband, even though he constantly insisted we were facing the struggle together. Looking back, I realized I was the only one truly fighting for our marriage. I slowly stopped talking about my own dreams because everyone seemed more interested in comforting Daniel than asking how I was surviving. Family dinners became conversations about his disappointment while I quietly cleared the plates and smiled through the ache. People often mistook my silence for weakness. They assumed that because I rarely argued, I noticed very little. They believed I accepted every excuse without question. They never understood that silence can be a place where truth grows. By the time I finally signed those divorce papers, I wasn't acting out of anger anymore. I was acting with certainty. And certainty is far more dangerous than rage. The changes were so small at first that I questioned my own instincts. Daniel started coming home later, always carrying the same tired smile and the same rehearsed explanation. Every excuse sounded reasonable on its own, yet together they formed a pattern I couldn't ignore. Adrian suddenly became a constant presence in our lives. He stopped by without calling, borrowed Daniel for business meetings, and laughed at jokes that ended the moment I entered the room. Their conversations would soften into whispers, followed by quick smiles that never reached their eyes. Family dinners became strangely uncomfortable. My mother would ask Daniel about work before greeting me. Adrian answered questions that were directed at my husband, as though they shared a private language. Whenever I noticed the odd glances between them, they brushed them away with easy laughter, leaving me feeling like an outsider in my own family. Then came the smaller cuts. Daniel forgot our anniversary for the first time. He missed doctor's appointments he had promised to attend. When I cried after another failed fertility treatment, he placed a distracted hand on my shoulder while staring at his phone. His body was beside me, but his attention belonged somewhere else. Adrian changed too. The brother who once defended me now interrupted me mid-sentence, corrected harmless details, and dismissed my concerns with a patient smile that felt more insulting than open criticism. "You've always been too emotional," he said one evening, pouring himself another cup of coffee without looking at me. Daniel didn't disagree. He simply lowered his eyes and kept eating. That silence echoed louder than any argument ever could. It was the moment I stopped wondering whether something was wrong. I began asking myself a different question. How long had they both been lying to me? The truth reached me by accident. One afternoon, Daniel left his tablet on the kitchen counter while he rushed out to take a call. A message appeared on the screen before it locked. It wasn't romantic. It wasn't explicit. It simply read, "The boys are asleep. Call me when she's gone." My hands went cold. The boys. We had no children. I stayed at the notification until the screen faded to black, then quietly placed the tablet exactly where I had found it. I didn't unlock it. I didn't search for more. I already knew enough. Over the following weeks, I stopped asking questions and started collecting answers. Bank records, travel receipts, hidden payments, and carefully timed absences slowly fit together like pieces of a puzzle neither of them expected me to solve. The final confirmation came from a private investigator. Daniel hadn't been living a double life with another woman. He had secretly built one with my own brother, and together they were raising newborn twins. I didn't scream. I didn't confront them. I realized that exposing the affair in a burst of anger would only give them time to rewrite the story. So I said nothing. Instead, I called a lawyer. That was the first move they never saw coming. The second would make silence far more terrifying than any accusation ever could. My lawyer gave me one piece of advice that changed everything. Don't interrupt people who believe they are winning. So I didn't. Instead of confronting Daniel or Adrian, I let them continue exactly as they had planned. They assumed I was still a quiet wife who apologized for problems she never caused. That assumption became my greatest advantage. I gathered every document that mattered. Joint bank statements, property records, investment accounts, insurance policies, and years of financial transactions were copied, organized, and stored where neither of them could reach them. Every meeting with my attorney was private, deliberate, and supported by evidence instead of emotion. Then I made one more appointment. Not with another investigator. With Daniel's father. He had always treated me with genuine kindness, and unlike everyone else, he believed honesty mattered more than appearances. I showed him only what could be proven. No dramatic speeches. No accusations. Just dates, records, photographs, and the investigator's report. He read every page without interrupting. When he finally looked up, the disappointment on his face was deeper than anger. I never imagined my son could do this, he said quietly. I asked him for only one thing. Please don't warn them. He nodded. From that moment on, everyone believed I was preparing to surrender. In reality, I was simply allowing the truth to arrive at exactly the right time. And truth, when timed carefully, has a way of speaking louder than revenge ever could. The divorce papers were signed without a single argument. Daniel barely looked at them. He wore the relaxed smile of someone convinced he had escaped every consequence. Adrian waited outside the lawyer's office, leaning against the wall with his hands in his pockets, avoiding the windows as though he couldn't bear to see me one last time. I wished them both a quiet goodbye. Nothing more. They drove straight to Daniel's parents' house, expecting a small celebration. Instead, they found his father sitting alone at the dining table with a thick folder resting in front of him. He didn't raise his voice. He simply looked at Daniel and asked, "Wait, she didn't tell you." Daniel frowned. "Tell me what?" His father slid the folder across the table. Inside were copies of every financial record, the investigator's report, and one final document Daniel had never imagined existed. Months before filing for divorce, I had legally transferred every asset that belonged solely to me into a protected trust, exactly as my attorney advised. The house Daniel believed he would keep had been purchased with my inheritance and remained my separate property. Every attempt to claim it had already failed on paper. Daniel's confidence disappeared page by page. Adrian stood frozen beside him. Neither of them looked at me as I quietly picked up my keys, walked out the front door, and left them alone with the truth they had spent years creating. The news spread through both families within days, but not in the way Daniel and Adrian had expected. No one argued over the divorce. They argued over the deception. Relatives who had once pitted Daniel for our childless marriage slowly discovered that I had spent years protecting his reputation while he quietly built another life behind my back. The sympathy he had carefully collected disappeared almost overnight, replaced by uncomfortable silence whenever his name was mentioned. Adrian lost something even harder to replace: trust. Friends stopped calling as often. Family gatherings became smaller, and invitations arrived less frequently. No one needed to insult him. They simply no longer believed his version of events. As for Daniel, he had the family he chose, but it came at the cost of the one that had raised him. His father kept his distance, unable to reconcile the son he loved with the man revealed by the evidence. People asked why I never exposed them publicly. The answer was simple. I didn't need strangers to judge them. The truth had already reached everyone whose opinion truly mattered. For years, I measured my worth by whether I could save a marriage that was quietly breaking behind my back. Walking away forced me to measure it differently. Sometimes the strongest victory isn't making the people who hurt you suffer. It's refusing to let their choices define the rest of your life. It has been almost a year since I walked away from that marriage. People often ask whether I regret staying silent for so long. I tell them silence wasn't my weakness. It was a space I needed to understand who desired a place in my future. The house no longer feels haunted by broken promises. I renovated it room by room, replacing old photographs with new memories. The guest room became an art studio. The nursery we once planned became a quiet library filled with books I had always wanted to read but never found time for. I also stopped measuring my life by the family I never had. Instead, I invested in friendships that never asked me to shrink myself, volunteered at a children's mentoring program, and slowly rediscovered the woman who had existed long before she became someone's wife. Daniel and Adrian occasionally reached out with carefully worded apologies. I never answered. Not because I hated them. Because I no longer needed anything from them. Forgiveness, I learned, doesn't always require reconciliation. Sometimes it simply means refusing to carry someone else's betrayal into the next chapter of your own life. The greatest revenge was never taking everything they valued. It was proving they had never taken the most valuable thing I possessed. My peace remained mine, and no betrayal was ever powerful enough to steal it.